The morning sun struggled through heavy clouds as Lieutenant Rachel Martinez arrived at Whiteman Air Force Base, her boots squelching through puddles left by the night's rain. The flight line stretched before her, F-16s arranged in perfect rows like sleeping predators. She clutched her weathered leather portfolio closer to her chest, the weight of maps and charts inside familiar and comforting. Rachel had always been different from the other officers. While they craved the rush of the cockpit, she found her. Passion in the details, the careful plotting of routes, the precise calculation of fuel stops, the meticulous planning that kept pilots alive. Her blonde hair was pulled back in regulation style, but wisps escaped to frame her face as she hurried toward the operations tent. Inside, the morning briefing was already underway. Major Derek Thompson, the squadron leader, stood at the front. With his characteristic swagger, pointing at a simplified route map pinned to the wall. His voice carried the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his own judgment. "Today's joint exercise is straightforward," Thompson announced, his sharp eyes scanning the room. "Direct route, fast approach, minimal complications. Weather. Show some cloud cover, but nothing we can't handle." Rachel slipped into the back of the tent, spreading her detailed charts across an empty table. She'd been up since 0400, analyzing weather patterns and updating her maps. What she saw made her stomach tighten with worry. The satellite imagery showed storm cells building rapidly, their movements unpredictable and dangerous. Captain Mike Rodriguez, one of the younger pilots, noticed her preparations and smirked. "Looks like Martinez is drawing her mazes again," he said loudly enough for others to hear. "What's at this time, Rachel? Scenic routes through Kansas?" Laughter rippled through the tent. Rachel felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her focus on her work. She'd drawn 3 alternate routes, one hugging the valley for storm protection, another with emergency fuel stops every 50 miles, and a third that accounted for rapid weather changes. Each line represented hours of careful analysis, but she knew what they saw: unnecessary caution from someone who'd never flown combat. "The Weather Service is calling for possible severe conditions," Rachel said, her voice steady but quiet. She looked up from her charts, meeting Thompson's dismissive gaze. "Sir, I'd like to present some alternate routes that account for..." "Lieutenant Martinez," Thompson interrupted, his tone professionally polite but firm. "I appreciate your thoroughness, but we've got a schedule to keep and objectives to meet. Speed and simplicity win wars, not overcomplicated flight plans." The tent fell quiet except for the distant rumble of engines warming up outside. Rachel felt the familiar sting of dismissal, the weight of being the only one who seemed to see the dangers ahead. She'd been through this before, her detailed planning dismissed as paranoia, her careful preparations mocked as excessive caution. Lieutenant Jennifer Hayes, the communications officer, caught Rachel's eye from across the room and offered a small, sympathetic smile. At least someone understood that Rachel's work came from genuine concern, not neurotic fear. "Look," said Captain Rodriguez, pulling out his phone. "If we need a tour guide, we'll call a..." He snapped a photo of Rachel's detailed charts and quickly typed something before showing it to his wingman. The screen displayed her maps with the caption, "The Scenic Route to Nowhere." Within minutes, the image had spread through the squadrons. Group chat. Rachel saw the phones lighting up around the room, heard the muffled chuckles that followed. The map she'd spent hours perfecting, maps that could save lives, had become a joke. Thompson clapped his hands together, drawing attention. "Back to the front. All right, people, let's get airborne. Stick to the primary route, maintain formation, and we'll be back in time for lunch." As the pilots filed out, pulling on their flight gear with confident strides, Rachel remained at her table. She folded her maps carefully, placing them in protective sleeves. The storm was building on the horizon, its dark edges creeping closer with each passing minute. She could feel the pressure dropping, see the subtle signs that others missed or chose to ignore. The tent began to empty, but Rachel stayed behind, watching through the open flaps as the F-16s powered up their engines. The roar filled the air, drowning out the distant rumble of thunder. She pressed her lips together, fighting the urge to run after Thompson and force him to look at her weather analysis. Instead, she remained at her post, maps spread before her, ready for what she knew was coming. The storm clouds gathered strength, their shadows racing across the tarmac like a dark omen. Rachel had done her part, prepared for every contingency, planned for every possibility. Now all she could do was wait and hope that her careful work wouldn't be needed. But deep down, she knew it would be. The morning briefing ended with the same dismissive confidence Rachel had come to expect, but something felt different this time. As the pilots dispersed to their aircraft, she noticed Lieutenant Jennifer Hayes lingering near the communication station, her usually calm demeanor replaced by quiet concern. "Rachel," Jennifer called softly, approaching the map table where Rachel was securing her charts. "I've been monitoring the weather feeds. The storm's moving faster than predicted." Rachel looked up, grateful to find an ally. Jennifer was one of the few officers who understood the critical importance of detailed planning. As the base's senior communications officer, she'd seen firsthand how quickly situations could deteriorate when preparation was lacking. 40% faster than the morning forecast, Rachel confirmed, pointing to the latest updates on her tablet. Wind shear indicators are spiking, and the cell structure is becoming more organized. "This isn't just weather, it's becoming a severe weather event," Jennifer frowned, studying the data. "Have you shown this to Major Thompson?" "I tried. He's focused on keeping the timeline." Rachel's voice carried frustration, but no surprise. She'd been down this road before. Speed and simplicity, remember? Outside, the F-16s began their taxi sequence, engines warming to full power. The sound was impressive. 16 aircraft preparing for what should have been a routine training exercise. Rachel watched through the tent flaps as Major Thompson climbed into his cockpit, his movements confident and assured. "Thompson's not a bad officer," Jennifer said carefully, "but he's got pressure from above. Colonel Martinez wants this joint exercise completed on schedule. There's been talk about budget reviews, efficiency ratings." Rachel nodded, understanding the politics but not accepting them as an excuse for ignoring safety. She'd heard the whispers, how her meticulous planning was seen as a drag on operational tempo, how some viewed her caution as a lack of confidence in the squadron's abilities. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio as he completed his pre-flight checks. "Tower, this is Viper 2, ready for departure. Hope everyone brought their GPS. We don't want to get lost following Martinez's treasure maps." More laughter echoed through the communications channels. Rachel felt the familiar burn of embarrassment, but Jennifer placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Your work matters," Jennifer said firmly. "Don't let them make you doubt that." The first flight of F-16s lifted off in perfect formation, their afterburners painting brilliant streaks against the darkening sky. Rachel watched them disappear into the distance, carrying with them the confidence that everything would go according to plan. But the storm had other intentions. Within 20 minutes, the first weather reports began filtering in from the exercise area. What had been classified as moderate cloud cover was rapidly intensifying. The storm system was not only moving faster, but growing stronger, its internal structure becoming more complex and dangerous. Rachel pulled up the latest satellite imagery on her tablet, her trained eye immediately recognizing the warning signs. The storm was developing a pronounced hook echo, indicating possible severe rotation. Visibility was dropping rapidly, and wind speeds were climbing beyond the parameters used in the morning briefing. "Jennifer, look at this," Rachel said, her voice tight with concern. She showed her the updated weather data. The storm's developing supercell characteristics. If they stay on the primary route, they're going to fly directly into the worst of it. Jennifer studied the screen, her expression growing more serious. Can you reach them on the alternate channels? I can try, but Thompson's been clear about radio discipline. He won't appreciate unsolicited weather updates from ground control. The radio crackled to life with the first reports from the squadron. The easy confidence of the morning was already beginning to strain as pilots reported increasing turbulence and deteriorating visibility. Base, this is Viper Lead. Thompson's voice came through clearly. We're encountering heavier weather than forecast, adjusting altitude to 28,000. Rachel and Jennifer exchanged worried glances. Altitude adjustment was a standard response to weather, but Rachel's charts showed that the storm extended much higher than normal. They weren't climbing above the weather, they were climbing deeper into it. Viper Lead, be advised, came the reply from the tower. Latest weather shows storm tops at 35,000 and rising. Recommend static burst through the transmission, cutting off the communication. The storm was beginning to interfere with radio signals, exactly as Rachel had predicted in her planning documents. They need to know about the alternate routes, Rachel said, moving toward the radio station. If they continue on the primary path, they're going to be in serious trouble. Jennifer nodded, but they both knew the protocol. Ground control could provide weather updates, but flight path changes had to come from the squadron leader or base command. Rachel wasn't authorized to direct aircraft movements, regardless of her expertise. The storm continued its relentless advance, and with each passing minute, the F-16s flew deeper into danger. Rachel stood at her maps, tracking their probable position against the storm's movements, calculating the narrowing window of opportunity for a safe route change. She'd prepared for this moment, drawn the plans that could save them, but she was powerless to act. All she could do was wait, hope, and prepare for the moment when her careful work would finally be needed. The radio crackled again with increasingly strained voices from the pilots. The storm was testing them, and Rachel knew the real test was only beginning. The storm hit the F-16 squadron like a living thing, reaching out with tendrils of wind and rain that seemed to grab at the aircraft with malicious intent. What had started as routine weather avoidance quickly became a fight for survival as the pilots found themselves scattered across a sky that had turned hostile. In the operations tent, Rachel stood frozen at her map table, listening to the radio. Communications dissolved into chaos. The confident voices of the morning briefing were replaced by clipped, urgent transmissions punctuated by bursts of static that seemed to swallow words whole. Base, Viper Lead, we're in heavy weather, visibility near zero. Thompson's transmission cut out in a wash of interference. Viper 3, I've lost visual on lead, repeat, lost visual. Captain Rodriguez's voice carried the first notes of real concern. Jennifer worked frantically at the communication station, trying to boost signal strength and filter out the storm's interference. Her usual calm professionalism was strained as she fought to maintain contact with the scattered squadron. Rachel, she called over the noise, I'm getting fragmented position reports. Can you plot their approximate locations? Rachel's hands moved swiftly across her charts, marking estimated positions based on the broken transmissions coming through. Her detailed maps, the ones that had been mocked just hours earlier, now showed their true value. She could see where the pilots were struggling, where the storm was strongest, and most importantly, where they might find refuge. They're spread across a 40-mile area, Rachel reported, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. The storm's pushing them off course faster than they can compensate. If they try to maintain the original route, a burst of static interrupted her analysis, followed by a voice tight with stress. Mayday, Mayday, this is Viper 7 engine fire warning declaring emergency. The tent fell silent except for the storm's howl against the canvas walls. An engine fire in these conditions could be catastrophic. Rachel felt her stomach drop as she realized how quickly the situation was deteriorating. Major Thompson's voice cut through the static, strained but still in command. All Vipers, this is lead. Form up on my position for emergency procedures. We're aborting the exercise and returning to base. But the storm had other plans. The radio erupted with overlapping transmissions as pilots reported their positions, each voice revealing how scattered they'd become. The neat formation that had left Whiteman Air Force Base was now a collection of individual aircraft fighting their own battles against the weather. I can't see the runway. Fuel state critical. Where's the emergency beacon? Rachel watched the chaos unfold with growing dread. These weren't inexperienced pilots. They were skilled professionals being overwhelmed by conditions that shouldn't have surprised anyone who'd been paying attention to the weather data. But Thompson's decision to stick with the simplified route had left them exposed when the storm intensified beyond all forecasts. Lieutenant Hayes appeared at Rachel's shoulder, her face pale but determined. The base commander is asking for options. Colonel Martinez wants to know if we can guide them home. Rachel looked down at her maps, the carefully drawn lines and notations that everyone had dismissed as overcomplicated paranoia. The alternate routes were all their pathways that used terrain features to avoid the worst weather, fuel stops that could extend their range, radio checkpoints that would work. Even in these conditions, I can get them home, Rachel said quietly, but they'll have to trust me. Through the radio static, she could hear the growing desperation in the pilots' voices. Fuel was becoming critical. Visibility was near zero, and the storm showed no signs of weakening. These were the moments when careful preparation became the difference between life and death. Major Thompson's voice emerged from the static, the authority in his tone beginning to crack. Base, we need immediate guidance. Standard navigation is compromised. Repeat, we need guidance. Rachel looked at Jennifer, who nodded and stepped aside from the primary radio station. It's your show, Rachel. Bring them home. Taking the headset felt like accepting a weight she'd been preparing to carry for years. Rachel's voice, when it came through the speakers, was steady and clear, a calm anchor in the storm of chaos that surrounded them. Viper lead, this is base navigation. I'm going to guide you home using alternate routes. You'll need to trust the headings I give you and follow them exactly. There was a pause in the static, and Rachel could almost feel Thompson's hesitation. These were the same routes he'd dismissed as unnecessary complications, now being offered as their salvation. Copy. Base navigation, Thompson replied, his professional pride wounded but his survival instincts intact. We're listening. Rachel spread her hands across the detailed charts, finding the valley route that would shelter them from the storm's worst fury. Her fingers traced the path she'd plotted with such care, seeing in her mind's eye how it would unfold. Viper lead, turn to heading 270 and descend to 15,000. You're going to thread the needle between two storm cells, but there's a corridor of calmer air along the ridgeline. The storm fought against every word she spoke, filling the radio with interference that threatened to drown out her guidance. But Rachel's voice remained steady, professional, and absolutely certain. She had planned for this moment, prepared for this crisis, and now her preparation would either save them all or fail them completely. The maps beneath her hands were no longer a source of mockery. They had become the lifeline that would bring the squadron home. Rachel's voice cut through the storm's interference like a beacon, each word measured and precise as she guided the scattered F-16s toward safety. Her hands moved across the detailed charts with practiced efficiency, tracking each aircraft's position while calculating fuel consumption and weather patterns in real time. Viper 3, Adjust heading to 285. She transmitted, her tone steady despite the chaos surrounding them. You're approaching a gap in the storm wall. Maintain current altitude and prepare for turbulence in 30 seconds. Captain. Rodriguez's voice came back strained but grateful. Copy, base. Following your guidance. This is incredible navigation. Around the operations tent, a small crowd had gathered. Word had spread quickly that Lieutenant Martinez was successfully guiding the squadron to conditions that had rendered their primary navigation useless. Officers who had dismissed her work that morning now watched in respectful silence as she orchestrated a complex rescue operation. Jennifer monitored multiple radio frequencies, coordinating with air traffic control and emergency services while keeping Rachel updated on weather changes. Storm cell moving northeast at 20 knots. She reported, "Your corridor is holding steady." Rachel nodded, already adjusting her calculations. The route she'd planned wasn't just about avoiding the worst weather. It was about using the terrain itself as protection. The valley corridor would shield the aircraft from the strongest winds while providing visual references when their instruments became unreliable. Viper 7, what's your fuel status? Rachel asked, concern evident in her voice. The pilot who'd reported the engine fire warning was falling behind the others. Base fuel is critical. Maybe 15 minutes of flight time remaining. The pilot's voice was tight with stress. Rachel studied her charts, finding the emergency airfield she'd marked during her morning preparations. It was a small civilian airport, but it had the runway length and emergency services needed for an F-16 in distress. Viper 7, I'm directing you to an alternate landing site. Turn to heading 310 and descend to 5,000 feet. There's a regional airport 12 miles ahead with a 7,500-foot runway. Understood, base. Proceeding to alternate field. The radio crackled with reports from the other pilots as Rachel's guidance began to pay off. Visibility was improving as they followed her predetermined routes. Fuel consumption was better than expected due to her careful altitude planning. And most importantly, the squadron was regaining cohesion as they found shelter from the storms. Fury. Major Thompson's voice came through clearly for the first time in 20 minutes. Base navigation. This is Viper Lead. Your routing is ... exceptional. How did you know about these corridors? Rachel allowed herself a small smile before responding. Detailed weather analysis and terrain mapping, sir. I've been tracking storm patterns in this region for months. What she didn't say was that she'd been doing this kind of analysis for years, preparing for scenarios that others hoped would never occur. Every dismissed suggestion, every mocked preparation, every moment of being called too cautious had led to this moment when her work was literally saving lives. Viper Lead, you're approaching the final waypoint, Rachel transmitted. Turn to heading 090 and begin your descent to 10,000 feet. You should break through the cloud layer in approximately 5 minutes and have visual contact with the base. The tension in the operations tent was palpable as everyone waited for confirmation. Rachel's guidance had been flawless so far, but the final approach would be the ultimate test. If her calculations were wrong, if the storm had shifted more than anticipated, the squadron could still be in serious danger. Base, this is Viper Lead. I have visual contact with the field. Repeat, visual contact confirmed. Thompson's voice carried relief and something else respect that hadn't been there that morning. One by one, the F-16S reported visual contact. With Whiteman Air Force Base, the storm still raged around them, but Rachel's carefully planned routes had threaded them through the worst of it, bringing them home safely when conventional navigation had failed completely. Outstanding work, base navigation, came the voice of Colonel Martinez, the base commander who had been monitoring the situation from the tower. That was exceptional airmanship from the ground. As the first F-16 touched down on the rain-slicked runway, Rachel felt the weight of the day beginning to settle on her shoulders. She'd done what she'd been trained to do, what she'd prepared for, but the magnitude of the situation was only now becoming clear. Jennifer appeared at her side, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You just saved 16 lives, Rachel. I hope you know that." Rachel looked down at her maps, the careful lines and notations that had been dismissed as paranoid over-planning. Every mark on those charts had mattered. Every calculation had proven necessary. The work that had made her a target of jokes and casual dismissal had become the difference between life and death. "I just did my job," Rachel said quietly, but even she could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the base, but inside the operations tent, there was a new atmosphere of respect and recognition. The officers who had laughed at her treasure maps that morning now watched her with something approaching awe. The squadron was coming home, and they all knew who had made it possible. The debriefing room at Whiteman Air Force Base had never felt so charged with emotion. As the last F-16 secured its position on the flight line, the pilots gathered with faces that showed the toll of their ordeal. What should have been a routine training exercise had become a harrowing survival story, and everyone in the room knew exactly who had made their safe return possible. Major Thompson entered last, his usually immaculate uniform wrinkled and damp from the emergency conditions. His swagger was gone, replaced by the sobered demeanor of someone who had looked death in the face and been pulled back by the careful work of others. He took his position at the front of the room, but his eyes immediately found Rachel, who sat quietly in the back with her mission reports. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thompson began, his voice carrying none of the casual confidence from the morning briefing. "Today we experienced what happens when weather becomes the enemy. What started as a straightforward exercise became a life-or-death situation that tested every aspect of our training and preparedness." Captain Rodriguez, who had been among the most vocal critics of Rachel's detailed planning, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The phone he'd used to mock her treasure maps sat silent on the table before him. The joke that had seemed so funny that morning now felt like a cruel reminder of his own short-sightedness. "I want to acknowledge," Thompson continued, "that our safe return was made possible by the exceptional navigation support provided by Lieutenant Martinez. Her detailed route planning and real-time guidance through impossible conditions brought us all home." The room fell silent. Rachel felt heat rise in her cheeks as every eye turned toward her. This was the recognition she'd never sought, earned through work that others had dismissed as unnecessary paranoia. Lieutenant Hayes spoke up from the communications station summary. "For the record, sir, Lieutenant Martinez's alternate routes reduced our exposure to the storm by over 60%. Her fuel calculations were accurate within 2%, and her terrain mapping provided safeguarders that our standard navigation completely missed." Thompson nodded, his expression serious. "Without her preparation, we would have been flying blind into conditions that could have been catastrophic. Her attention to detail, what some of us called excessive caution, proved to be exactly what we needed when everything else failed." The weight of those words settled over the room like a blanket. Several pilots who had participated in the morning's mockery now looked down at their hands, the shame of their earlier behavior evident in their postures. "I owe you an apology, Martinez," said Captain Rodriguez, his voice quiet but clear. "We all do. What we called overthinking was actually professional excellence. You saw what we missed, planned for what we ignored, and saved our lives because of it." Rachel felt tears threaten at the corners of her eyes, but she maintained her composure. "I appreciate that, Captain. I hope we can all learn from this experience." Colonel Martinez entered the debriefing room, his presence immediately commanding attention. As base commander, His perspective on the day's events would carry significant weight in the official record. "I've been reviewing the mission logs and weather data," the colonel announced. What happened today was a perfect storm of circumstances, literally. But it was also a perfect example of why detailed planning and careful preparation matter in our profession. He moved to the front of the room, his gaze sweeping over the assembled pilots before settling on Rachel. "Lieutenant Martinez, your work today exemplified the highest standards of Air Force professionalism. Your detailed analysis, thorough preparation, and calm execution under pressure saved aircraft and lives." The formal recognition felt surreal to Rachel. For so long, her work had been tolerated at best, dismissed at worst. Now it was being praised by the base commander in front of the entire squadron. Effective immediately, Colonel Martinez continued. "Lieutenant Martinez will be taking a more prominent role in mission planning for all squadron operations. Our expertise in weather analysis and route planning will be integrated into our standard briefing procedures." Thompson nodded his agreement, though Rachel could see it wasn't easy for him to accept that his simplified approach had nearly led to disaster. "Sir, I fully support that decision. Today proved that Lieutenant Martinez's methodology isn't just valuable, it's essential." As the debriefing concluded and pilots began filing out, several stopped to personally thank Rachel. The same officers who had shared jokes about her scenic routes now spoke with genuine gratitude about the guidance that had brought them safely home. Captain Rodriguez was the last to approach her, his usual cocky demeanor replaced by sincere humility. "Rachel, I need you to know how sorry I am. The photo, the jokes, all of it. You've been doing crucial work while we've been treating it like a punchline." Rachel met his eyes, seeing genuine remorse there. "We all have different strengths, Mike. The important thing is that we learn to value each other's contributions." As the room emptied, Rachel remained behind, organizing her reports and maps. The charts that had been dismissed that morning were now being copied and distributed as essential reference materials. Her careful work had been vindicated in the most dramatic way possible. Jennifer appeared at her side, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "How does it feel to go from pariah to hero in one day?" Rachel accepted the coffee gratefully, allowing herself a small smile. "I never wanted to be a hero. I just wanted my work to matter." "Well, mission accomplished," Jennifer said. "You've changed how this squadron thinks about preparation and planning. That's a legacy worth having." Outside, the storm was finally beginning to weaken, its fury spent against the base's defenses. But inside the operations building, the changes Rachel had brought about would last much longer than the weather. Her quiet strength and meticulous preparation had saved lives and earned respect that would endure. The joke was over. The recognition was real. And Rachel Martinez had proven that sometimes the most important battles are won not in the sky, but in the careful work done long before anyone takes flight. 3 weeks after the storm, the atmosphere at Whiteman Air Force Base had undergone a fundamental transformation. What had once been casual dismissal of detailed planning was now replaced by a culture that valued thorough preparation and careful analysis. Rachel found herself at the center of this change, her expertise sought after and respected by the same officers who had once mocked her work. The morning briefing room had been reconfigured to accommodate Rachel's comprehensive approach to mission planning. Large displays now showed detailed weather analyses, multiple route options, and terrain mapping that accounted for various emergency scenarios. Her maps, once relegated to a corner table, now occupied prime position at the front of the room. "Today's exercise will utilize a layered approach to navigation," Rachel explained to the assembled pilots, her voice carrying the confidence that came with hard-earned respect. "Primary route here, with 2 alternates that account for weather variations and potential equipment failures. Major Thompson, who had initially resisted the changes, now actively supported Rachel's expanded role. The near disaster had fundamentally altered his perspective on leadership and the value of diverse expertise within his squadron. "Questions about the routing?" Thompson asked, scanning the room. The pilots who raised their hands now did so with genuine interest, not skeptical challenges. Captain Rodriguez, who had become one of Rachel's strongest advocates, studied the charts with careful attention. "The valley approach on alternate 2, that's using the same principle that got us during the storm, right?" "Exactly," Rachel confirmed. "Terrain masking for weather protection, with the added benefit of radar signature reduction if we encounter simulated threats." The transformation wasn't just tactical, it was cultural. The squadron had learned that survival often depended on the quiet professionals who did their work without fanfare, who prepared for scenarios hoped would never occur. Lieutenant Hayes had been promoted to Senior Communications Officer, partly in recognition of her role in supporting Rachel during the crisis. She now worked closely with Rachel to ensure that detailed planning was supported by robust communication protocols. "Weather update shows possible afternoon thunderstorms," Jennifer announced from her station. "Nothing like what we faced 3 weeks ago, but significant enough to warrant backup planning." Rachel nodded, already pulling up the alternative routes she'd prepared. The squadron had learned that backup planning wasn't paranoia, it was professional responsibility. Colonel Martinez entered the briefing room, his presence still commanding, but now carrying a different energy. The base commander had become an advocate for the comprehensive planning approach that Rachel represented. "I have an announcement," the colonel said, addressing the assembled squadron. "Lieutenant Martinez has been selected for early promotion to captain, effective immediately. Additionally, she's been chosen to represent our base at the Air Force's new Integrated Mission Planning Conference in Colorado Springs." The room erupted in applause, genuine appreciation from pilots who understood exactly what Rachel's work meant to their safety and success. The recognition was gratifying, but Rachel felt most satisfied by the change and how the squadron approached their profession. Furthermore, Colonel Martinez continued, "The detailed planning methodology developed by Captain Martinez is being evaluated for implementation across multiple bases." Her work during the storm has caught the attention of senior Air Force leadership. Rachel felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the recognition, but also energized by the opportunity to influence aviation safety on a broader scale. Her careful preparation and attention to detail, traits that had once made her an outsider, were now being held up as examples of excellence. After the briefing, as pilots prepared for their training flights, Rachel remained behind to update her charts with the latest intelligence reports. The work was the same, but the context had changed completely. Instead of laboring in isolation, she now collaborated with a team that valued her expertise. Captain Rodriguez approached her station, his usual casual demeanor replaced by professional respect. "Rachel, sorry. Captain Martinez, I wanted to thank you again. Not just for the storm, but for changing how we think about this job." "We all learned something that day," Rachel replied. "The important thing is that we keep learning and growing." Thompson joined them, carrying a folder of updated mission parameters. "Captain Martinez, I'd like your assessment of next week's long-range exercise. The weather patterns look complex, and I want to make sure we're prepared for all contingencies." The request that would have been unthinkable a month ago now felt natural and necessary. Rachel accepted the folder with professional satisfaction, knowing that her analysis would be valued and implemented. "I'll have a full brief ready by tomorrow morning," she said. "Multiple routes, weather contingencies, and emergency protocols." As the squadron prepared for their afternoon flights, Rachel stood at the edge of the flight line, watching the F-16S taxi toward the runway. The aircraft were the same, the pilots were the same, but everything else had changed. The culture of The squadron now embraced the careful preparation that had once been dismissed as excessive caution. The storm had been the catalyst, but the real change came from a recognition that excellence in military aviation required contributions from every member of the team. Rachel's quiet strength and meticulous preparation had always been valuable now. That value was finally recognized and celebrated. Jennifer appeared beside her, watching the jets take off in perfect formation. How does it feel to revolutionize an entire squadron's approach to mission planning? Rachel smiled, feeling the satisfaction of work well done and properly valued. It feels like coming home. The F-16 disappeared into the clear blue sky, following routes that balanced efficiency with safety, confidence with caution. The perfect weather meant that Rachel's backup plans wouldn't be needed today, but everyone knew they were there ready, detailed, and absolutely essential. The transformation was complete. The squadron had learned to value the quiet strength that saves lives. 6 months later, Captain Rachel Martinez stood before a packed auditorium at the Air Force Academy, her presentation charts displayed on the massive screen behind her. The room was filled with future officers, current pilots, and senior leadership all gathered to hear about the comprehensive planning methodology that had evolved from that stormy day at Whiteman Air Force Base. Effective mission planning isn't about creating complexity, Rachel explained, her voice carrying the authority of proven expertise. It's about preparing for complexity that already exists in our operational environment. The audience listened with rapt attention as she walked through the case study that had become legendary within Air Force circles. The storm encounter had been analyzed, studied, and incorporated into training curricula across multiple bases. What had started as one squadron's crisis had become a teaching moment for the entire service. In the front row, Colonel Martinez sat with obvious pride, representing the base that had learned to value detailed preparation. Beside him, Major Thompson, recently promoted himself, took notes on Rachel's presentation. The man who had once dismissed her work as overcomplication now advocated for comprehensive planning at every opportunity. A key insight, Rachel continued, is that detailed preparation doesn't slow down operations, it enables them. When crisis strikes, having multiple options available allows for rapid, informed decision-making rather than reactive scrambling. Captain Rodriguez, now serving as an instructor pilot at the Academy, nodded from his position in the audience. He'd become one of Rachel's most effective advocates, sharing the story of his own transformation from skeptic to supporter with every class he taught. The presentation concluded with video testimonials from the pilots who had been guided home through the storm. Each spoke about the life-saving value of thorough preparation and the importance of respecting diverse expertise within military teams. During the question and answer session, a young cadet raised her hand. Captain Martinez, how do you respond to criticism that detailed planning creates risk-averse cultures? Rachel smiled, recognizing her younger self in the question. Calculated. Risk-taking requires calculation. You can't make informed decisions about risk without understanding all the variables involved. Detailed planning doesn't eliminate risk, it gives you the tools to manage it effectively. The response drew appreciative murmurs from the audience. Rachel had learned to articulate the value of her approach in ways that resonated with different perspectives within the military culture. After the presentation, Rachel was approached by General Patricia Davidson, the Air Force's Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations. The General's presence at the Academy lecture indicated the high level attention that Rachel's work had attracted. Captain Martinez, General Davidson said, extending her hand, I've been following your career development with great interest. Your work has influenced policy changes at the highest levels of our service. Rachel felt humbled by the recognition from such senior leadership. Thank you, General. I'm honored that our experiences have proven valuable to the broader Air Force. We're implementing your comprehensive planning model across all major commands, the general continued. But more importantly, we're using your story to teach young officers about the value of diverse perspectives and thorough preparation. The conversation continued as they walked through the Academy's historic corridors, past portraits of aviation pioneers who had changed the course of military history through innovation and dedication. There's something else I wanted to discuss with you, General Davidson said, her tone becoming more formal. We're establishing a new position at Air Force Headquarters Director of Integrated Mission Planning. The role would involve developing comprehensive planning standards across all operational commands. Rachel felt her breath catch. The opportunity represented everything she'd worked toward, a chance to influence aviation safety and effectiveness on a service-wide scale. The position comes with promotion to major and assignment to the Pentagon, the general continued. Your expertise would be applied to everything from combat operations to humanitarian missions. Interested? Yes, ma'am, Rachel replied without hesitation. I'm very interested. As they reached the Academy's main entrance, General Davidson paused to look back at the auditorium where Rachel's presentation had concluded. You know, Captain, your story has become more than just a case study in good planning. It's become an example of how the Air Force can better value quiet professionalism and diverse perspectives. Rachel nodded, understanding the broader implications. Her experience had illuminated issues that went beyond weather navigation questions, about leadership, inclusion, and the importance of listening to all voices within military organizations. The storm was just a catalyst, Rachel said thoughtfully. The real lesson was about creating cultures where careful preparation is valued and different approaches are respected. Later that evening, Rachel found herself back at Whiteman Air Force Base for what would be one of her final squadron briefings before transferring to her new assignment. The operations tent had been replaced by a modern briefing facility, but the spirit of thorough preparation that she'd helped instill remained unchanged. Lieutenant Jennifer Hayes, now Captain Hayes, and the base's senior operations officer, conducted the evening briefing with the same attention to detail that had become the squadron's hallmark. Weather for tomorrow's exercise shows clear conditions, Jennifer announced, but we're maintaining full backup planning protocols as standard procedure. Rachel watched with satisfaction as the pilots reviewed multiple route options, studied weather contingencies, and asked detailed questions about emergency procedures. The culture that had once dismissed such preparation as paranoid overplanning now embraced it as professional excellence. Major Thompson approached Rachel after the briefing, carrying a leather portfolio that looked suspiciously familiar. This belonged to you, he said, handing over the worn case that had carried Rachel's maps during the storm. I thought you might want to keep it as you move on to bigger things. Rachel accepted the portfolio with genuine emotion. The leather was worn smooth from years of use, marked with the accumulated evidence of countless hours spent in detailed preparation. Actually, she said, I'd like to leave it here. Let it remind everyone that the work we do in these quiet moments, the preparation that no one sees, that's what saves lives when everything goes wrong. Thompson nodded with understanding. The portfolio would remain in the squadron's operations center, a tangible reminder of the value of thorough preparation and quiet professionalism. As Rachel prepared to leave Whiteman Air Force Base for the final time, she took one last walk along the flight line. The F-16s stood in their familiar rows, sleek and powerful beneath the evening stars. Somewhere in the operations center, the next generation of planners was preparing for tomorrow's missions, drawing careful lines on charts, calculating fuel loads, and studying weather patterns. The work continued, and that was exactly as it should be. Rachel had proven that careful preparation and quiet strength could change cultures, save lives, and transform organizations. Her legacy would live on in every detailed chart, every backup plan, and every pilot who returned safely home because someone had taken the time to prepare for what others hoped would never happen. The storm had tested them all, but it was the quiet strength, the strength that prepares, that plans, that persists without recognition, that had brought them through. That strength would endure long after the weather cleared and the recognition faded. Rachel Martinez had found her place, proven her worth, and changed her corner of the Air Force forever. 2 years later, Major Rachel Martinez stood in her Pentagon office, reviewing mission planning reports from Air Force bases around the world. The comprehensive planning methodology she'd developed had been implemented across all major commands, and the results spoke for themselves: a 40% reduction in weather-related incidents, improved mission success rates, and most importantly, lives saved through better preparation. Her office walls displayed maps from various operations, humanitarian missions in disaster zones, combat operations in challenging terrain, and training exercises that pushed the boundaries of what was possible through careful planning. Each map represented lives protected through thorough preparation. A knock on her door interrupted her review. Captain Jennifer Hayes entered, now serving as Rachel's deputy in the Integrated Mission Planning Division. The quarterly safety reports are in, Jennifer announced, placing a thick folder on Rachel's desk. The numbers are even better than we projected. Bases using our comprehensive planning model are showing significant improvements across all safety metrics. Rachel smiled as she reviewed the data. The transformation that had begun in the storm-battered operations tent at Whiteman Air Force Base was now protecting air crews around the globe. There's something else, Jennifer continued, her tone shifting to barely contained excitement. General Davidson wants to see you. Something about his special recognition. An hour later, Rachel found herself in General Davidson's office, surrounded by senior Air Force leadership. The atmosphere felt formal and significant, reminiscent of promotion ceremonies and award presentations. Major Martinez, General Davidson began, your work over the past 2 years has fundamentally changed how the Air Force approaches mission planning and risk management. The comprehensive planning model you developed has been adopted by allied air forces and is being studied by other service branches. Rachel felt honored but also humbled. The recognition was gratifying, but what mattered most was knowing that her work was protecting those who served. Today, I have the privilege of announcing your selection for promotion to Lieutenant Colonel. The General continued. Additionally, you've been chosen to lead the new Joint Service Mission Planning Institute, a position that will allow you to influence safety and planning standards across all branches of the military. The room erupted in applause from the assembled officers. Rachel felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the opportunity. Her quiet work on weather maps and backup routes had evolved into a career dedicated to protecting military personnel through better preparation. Later that evening, Rachel received a video call from Whiteman Air Force Base. The familiar faces of her former squadron appeared on screen, gathered in the operations center where her journey had begun. "Congratulations, Colonel Martinez," came a chorus of voices from pilots who had once dismissed her work as excessive caution. Major Thompson, now the squadron commander, stepped forward with obvious pride. "Rachel, I wanted you to know that your old portfolio is still here, still reminding us every day about the value of thorough preparation. We've had 3 major weather events since you left, and each time your methodology brought everyone home safely." Captain Rodriguez appeared on screen, grinning broadly. The new lieutenants coming through training all know the story of the storm and the maps that saved the squadron. You're officially part of base legend now. Rachel laughed, feeling the warmth of connection with the people who had shared her transformation from dismissed outsider to respected leader. Just remember to keep preparing for what others hope won't happen. That's where real strength lies. As the call concluded, Rachel reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The storm that had tested them all had revealed something fundamental about leadership, preparation, and the value of quiet professionalism in a world that often celebrated only the loudest voices. Her phone buzzed with a text message from a young Air Force Academy cadet. "Colonel Martinez, I just read about your comprehensive planning model in our coursework. Your story inspired me to focus on intelligence and planning rather than pilot training. Thank you for showing that there are many ways to serve with excellence." Rachel smiled as she read the message. This was her true legacy, not the promotions or recognition, but the young officers who would embrace thorough preparation, who would value diverse perspectives, and who would understand that quiet strength could change the world. Outside her Pentagon window, the lights of Washington, D.C. sparkled in the darkness. Somewhere around the globe, Air Force personnel were conducting missions guided by planning principles that had emerged from a stormy day when careful preparation had meant the difference between life and death. The maps were still being drawn, the backup plans still being made, and the quiet professionals still doing their essential work without fanfare. Rachel had proven that sometimes the most important victories come not from dramatic action, but from the patient, careful work done in preparation for moments that may never come. But when those moments did arrive, when the storms hit and the plans failed and the confident voices fell silent, it was the quiet strength that would guide them home. Rachel Martinez had found her calling in the careful lines drawn on a map, in the backup plans that others called paranoid, in the patient preparation that saved lives when everything else failed. Her legacy would live on in every pilot who returned safely home, guided by the comprehensive planning that had once been dismissed but was now recognized as essential. The storm had passed, but the strength it revealed would endure forever. Years later, the story of Lieutenant Rachel Martinez and the F-16 squadron became required reading at military academies worldwide. It was taught not just as a lesson in navigation and planning, but as an example of how organizations could better value quiet professionalism and diverse expertise. The comprehensive planning methodology she developed saved countless lives across multiple services and allied nations. Her approach became the gold standard for mission planning, proving that thorough preparation wasn't excessive caution. It was professional excellence. But perhaps most importantly, Rachel's story inspired a generation of military personnel to embrace their own unique strengths, to persist in the face of dismissal, and to understand that sometimes the most crucial work happens in the quiet moments. When no one is watching, the maps may fade, the recognition may be forgotten, but the lives saved through careful preparation will endure forever. That is the true measure of quiet strength, not in the applause it receives, but in the lives it protects through patient, thorough, and absolutely essential work. Sometimes the strongest voice is the one you almost missed. Thank you for reading this incredible story of quiet strength and professional excellence. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. We share amazing real-life stories of courage, determination, and triumph over adversity every week. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world. Have you ever experienced a moment where your careful preparation saved the day? Or perhaps you know someone whose quiet expertise proved invaluable when it mattered most. Share your stories with us. Don't forget to like this story if Rachel's journey inspired you, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their behind-the-scenes work truly matters. Coming up next, more incredible stories of everyday heroes whose dedication and expertise changed lives when it counted most. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an inspiring story. Remember, every professional has value. Every careful, planner makes a difference, and sometimes the most important work happens in the quiet moments when no one else is watching.